it's a pivotal moment for our sector, really. If we look at the rate of inflation as it stands at the moment, we're in double-digit figures. We're looking at an unprecedented squeeze on household bills. We've got utility prices starting to come down across the board, but particularly in household energy, it's been high for a long period now. So for our industry, providing something that many would see as a critical lifeline, and I don't think anyone would really challenge that following the experience of the pandemic and so many of us being dependent on connectivity. We're at a point where a focus on cost at both the wholesale and retail level is really driving the policy discussion. So I think on the consumer level, that means that topics like the social tariff and their availability, and also mid-contract price rises and their transparency, and at a wholesale level, the way that Openreach, our monopoly incumbent, is regulated and pegged to inflation. They're the key points at the moment that I think are driving a policy discussion in our industry. And there's varied views on each side of those debates, but I think it's critical to have that discussion now because some decisions that are being made over the next 6 to 12 months are going to structure those discussions going forwards. So the P&I conference this year is ideally timed. I think in regards to social tariffs, whilst we have moved as an industry to put more focus on advertising these, on making them more transparent on our websites, I think there is more we can do. So we know that there is the API the government is helping us with to validate where our customers are saying that they need support, and that's a really useful tool. But at the moment, most social tariffs in the industry lean towards the more entry-level product. Whilst that might be fine for some households, that's probably not going to cut it for a household with multiple children and people streaming content at the same time, for example. So I think there's more we can do there. I think stepping back from just looking at social tariffs and cost of living more broadly, we've got a position on mid-contract price rises where we're campaigning to see that the practice of having that kind of clause in a consumer contract at least made far more transparent and hopefully removed and not permitted in line with many other countries, particularly in Europe. But there are other sides to the argument of that, and I'm sure other operators would point to the cost pressures that they themselves are feeling in this cost of living squeeze, as inflation is high and some of the core components that are used to build critical infrastructure are increasing. And what do you do when your business model did not plan for a double-digit inflation rate during the critical build phase? So I think that'll be a really, really interesting debate to have at the conference. And then stepping back even again and how we compare to other industries that are also trying to navigate their way through a very, very high rate of inflation, consistently so for a period of time now. Households across multiple different purchase points are being squeezed. And so as consumers become increasingly cost conscious, how does our industry react to make sure they've got the best information available to secure the package that is right for them? Now, there's lots of discussion at the moment about what we could do to do that and help consumers, but I think that's still a big question mark in policy for our industry at the moment, and it will be really interesting to talk through that at the conference. I think there's lots of different roles here for different stakeholders to help achieve this. I don't think it's just a question that is totally focused on whether it be the ISP or government, as in national government or local government. I think they've all got a role to play. So operators can definitely, as we've touched on already, do more in regards to publicising their social tariffs. They can do more to work with the local authorities that they're building the infrastructure within, to not only plan ahead more effectively, but also work with if they're their social housing units and their administrators, to ensure that when they are building their infrastructure through these areas, if there are groups that would usually struggle to make best use of that infrastructure, we're linking up with every community group that might be available there to ensure that they're aware of it, they're aware of the social tariffs that might be available to them, they're aware of when that infrastructure is becoming live. That sounds simple, but the practicality of it is often much trickier. The process of building infrastructure, particularly in dense urban areas, is riddled with complex permitting, civils restrictions, and trying to keep all the different stakeholders aligned in doing that can often mean the end user, the customer that you're trying to serve, can often, sadly, sometimes be an afterthought if that process is handled poorly. So I think local government can certainly play a role in helping guide operators in saying, this local stakeholder for this community is extremely useful to help you talk to X community group who would otherwise be on the wrong side of the digital divide for whatever host of reasons that might be, and they can be very varied. If you don't know where they are, and you don't have the buy-in from, say, the administrator of the social housing site, often it can just be a case of, well, can we get access or can't we? And then what use is that if the residents that you're trying to serve aren't even aware of the best tariffs that might be suitable to them? Now, if there are any local government representatives who are listening to this, I think there's a very fair challenge to say, well, some local government organisations really do try to do that and rise to that challenge, and sometimes they feel that their hands are held by restrictions from national policy and national government. And I think then we go to the national debate about what can we do to give local authorities the encouragement to more directly engage with the network operators in their area, both fixed and mobile, to try to encourage that community engagement, because some of them sometimes feel very nervous about engaging with operators, trying to talk about tariffs and raise awareness of them. They don't want to favour one over the other, which is a completely legitimate concern. But what kind of structure could we put in place where we can mitigate that concern, resolve it, and then still deliver for residents to the point that we're identifying the communities that need our support most to get them online and finding the tariffs that best suit them? So operators need to do more. I think local government, there's some great examples of best practice out there, but a better structure overall from national government to encourage more cross-stakeholder working, I think, would be the piece that would really move the dial. Equinox 2, obviously driving headlines at the moment. A very contentious topic in the industry, and I'm sure at the conference we'll have a really good and thorough debate about it. To try and treat that debate fairly, I'll try and characterize the kind of the two sides of it. So there's the one side of the debate where you would say if the Openreach is seeing an increasingly competitive environment at the network build level, it would obviously seek to react to that. It has significant market share, it has significant market power, and it would quite rationally seek to defend its market share in any way that it reasonably could within the parameters of competition law. And so seeking to drive a discount model that encourages its key customers, the national ISPs, to migrate to their full fibre quickly seems quite reasonable and rational. The other side of that debate would be, well, if you're a network operator competing against Openreach in that market, Openreach has significant market power. It has tools at its disposal where it can drive down price to a point that in the short to medium term only it could stomach, most likely. And it faces strong incentives to try to test that if it could. And therefore it's Ofcom's role to make sure that it doesn't act to do that. And some would look at any discount coming from the incumbent with that concern in mind. And so really it comes down to a debate of, well, what is the appropriate structure for such a discount model? And to what scale can a discount be, until you start running into the question of what actually can genuine competitors recover their costs. If you're going to that level, you might say in the short term, well, isn't it great that pricing is coming down for wholesale broadband? But actually, if it's to the point of undermining competition in the long run piece, that's bad for consumers, because that absence of choice means the monopoly again gets the opportunity to have far more power over the ultimate price point. So I think that in a nutshell, that's the debate. It goes to the heart of the competitive dynamic that we've seen grow in the fixed broadband industry over the last decade. And I'm sure it's a point that is not going to be entirely resolved just in Equinox 2 in and of itself. I think wherever Ofcom comes to on that decision, and we know that they're taking an additional 2 months to come to a view on that, that debate will run on, because it will also go on to how aggressively, or if at all, scale M&A happens in this industry, or whether we've actually got it wrong, and perhaps there's far more competition in the long run that can be sustained in this market, perhaps on a regional basis, than BT CEO's recent comments in the Financial Times would have us believe. So we will see, and it will be a really interesting discussion point of the conference. I think it's certainly welcome that Ofcom are keen to provide clarity for the use of terminology in fixed broadband. I think many in the industry would see it as perhaps a bit too late. I think there was multiple campaigns from different operators in the past to try to have this debate earlier. And so there is certainly a school of thought that actually now, where most operators are delivering full fibre in some form, then actually trying to turn back the clock and bring that point of clarity to the use of the term fibre and full fibre and perhaps part fibre is a bit late. But at the same time, it's become so confused that we're still in the position where lots of consumers do not know whether they are actually taking full fibre, or as in FTTP or FTTB, or whether they're taking coax, or whether they're taking fibre to the cabinet. Now, there's a danger that you go too far, and that we get so lost in terminology that the resolution doesn't fix the problem, because it's not actually helping consumers to work out what is useful to them. So I think actually raising the question, trying to fix it so that consumers have a better view of the rough technical parameters of the product they're going to take is really useful. So I think giving them a sense of, well, if you have a service that ultimately can deliver you gigabit capable upload and download speeds, that's going to be understood as full fibre. And as an industry, you can talk to full fibre in that way. If it can't do that because the fibre actually is only getting to the cabinet, or it's a hybrid mix like coax, for example, so it couldn't deliver the gigabit capable upload, then that's materially different to the customer. So drawing that line is useful. I think if we get too far down into, well, what type of full fibre, and are we going to start telling them if it's point to point, or what the architecture is, I think that might be overdoing it. But I think if we keep the consumer in mind, and we're trying to solve the problem of, can we make it clearer for them to know what they're buying, so that they can better choose the service that best suits their needs? Great. So I think whilst it might be a bit late, it's still a really useful policy discussion, and I think there's a lot of clarity we could still bring to help consumers pick what's right for them. I think we've already touched in a bit of detail on how cost of living more broadly is impacting our industry, so I won't repeat those points. But I think more broadly, an environment where the growth forecast, the expectations around inflation, the expectations around supply chain are also now markedly different from when many of these newer alternative network operators were emerging. That it really does raise a challenge now about who has developed a business model that can sustain that change. So I think what it really does is move the dial from hypothetical discussions about capital raised and a very loose definitions of prem passed, where each operator wants to make these enormous declarations about all the towns and cities they've passed, and if they've landed a cabinet vaguely somewhere in a town, we'll say the whole town is covered. I think those days are over because of this, because of the change in the economic environment. And I think investors are now becoming increasingly aware of, well, what level of take-up is this actually driving? It's all well and good building infrastructure, but if it's not actually moving the dial for the people that are taking it, or worse still, it's actually not seeing people utilize the service at all, then it's really not worth the press release of your capital claim and your declaration about towns and cities passed. So that, I think what we'll start to see is far more focus on, well, what is the revenue that you're driving? Do we define the biggest altnet by prems passed, or do we define that by revenue, or do we define it by the number of customers? And we hear lots about the amount of money that altnets are raising, but we don't hear as much from the altnet community about how many customers they're serving. And I think as those harder questions start being asked, it will prompt our industry to mature. And on the flip side of that coin, so looking at it from the perspective of, say, the national ISPs and the incumbents, it's a question of, well, is this level of competition of so many operators, so many new entrants delivering this infrastructure sustainable? And if it's going to change and mature, which are the ones are going to be staying around that we need to think about strategically? If you're a national ISP, do you look at engaging, becoming a customer of that network? The risks of backing the wrong horse and putting all that capital into integration and it doesn't pan out, that's a real risk. And if you're Openreach or your Virgin Media, you're thinking through, well, what do I have to do to respond to this level of competition? What can I do within the parameters of competition law? And what kind of environment, how am I going, or more usefully, how do you position your business model in light of that increased competition, where there might be winners and losers, and how do you make that useful to ultimately serving the customer base that you currently have? So if that's a new product portfolio that might be available, if it's giving you a better coverage ultimately in a region where previously your coverage has been poor on your own network, do you start to factor those kind of questions into your future investment decision making? So there's lots of really knotty problems that come up in trying to answer those questions. But ultimately, I think that's where the debate is going to move. And it's just about the market starting to mature now, and it's being prompted by a very different economic environment to the environment where many of these altnets were born in.